Friday, 4:59 p.m. My pen touched the deed like a gavel. The picture frame clicked on the wall. The house cleared its throat. Door slam. Mother, why would you list the house without us? We had plans. Steam in the entry. Son in front, daughter-in-law behind, bracelet flashing like a yes to a life I never chose. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The words were heavy enough to settle into the air between us. For 38 years, I was a nurse and a mother before I was anything else. If you've ever worked an ER night shift in February, you know how grief can come in on a stretcher ready to argue with you. I learned the tone that calms a man who's sure he's dying and the touch that makes a scared child breathe evenly again. At home, after Ed died, that skill turned into a way of being invisible. I smoothed everything for everyone and forgot to leave any corners sticking out where someone might catch and ask if I needed something. My son Kyle once loved peanut butter roll-ups I made with a rolling pen and too much pride. He grew into a man who brought his phone to our conversations like a third person we were both trying to impress. He is good at his job in IT. He cannot fix a sink to save his life. Brittany runs an Etsy shop, or people buy neutral wreaths that look like you pressed pause on fall. The wreaths are nice. They are also never enough. Every second and fourth Sunday, they stop by for exactly 40 minutes. The first time I noticed the time, I thought it was coincidence. The seventh time, I noticed how Brittany would look around the room like she was staging it with her eyeballs. "This place has good bones, Marge," she'd say. "If we took down that wall and opened the kitchen, you could get a big island. Instant equity." Kyle sat on Ed's recliner like it was a porch he didn't intend to sit on long. "You know it's safer to have everything on one level," he'd say, nodding like he'd read safety in an article once and kept the word in his pocket for when he needed to win. "You won't need the basement. Why keep the stairs?" I wanted to tell him we kept the stairs because the furnace was down there and the freezer with the cinnamon rolls and the boxes of photographs no one had scanned. We kept the stairs because the laundry was there and I liked the feeling of the warm dryer sheets in my hands like paper that smelled like a hug. We kept the stairs because you don't demolish a part of your life just because someone points at a new countertop in a catalog. Instead, I said, "Coffee?" Because a nurse knows when you can't change minds, you can at least keep hands busy. When they left, the house was too quiet in the way only a lived-in thing can be. I brewed myself another cup from the same old machine that sometimes made a psst like an old man laughing into his sleeve. I looked out at the lilacs. Ed planted them the year Kyle turned 5. And every spring they came back like a memory I hadn't earned, but was grateful for anyway. I didn't know what I was waiting for until the clue showed up wearing a friendly face. It was a Wednesday. In the church basement, the fluorescent lights hum as if they're praying on your behalf. I volunteer there on rummage sale sorting days because it's the one place in town where no one pretends the old things never had a life. We stack the lamps with their faded shades as if we're tucking them into new beds. We lay the corduroy jackets out flat and smooth the elbows. We give a last dignity to objects the world calls dated. Ruth runs the bake table like a 5-star general. She is 3 years older than me, shorter by 2 inches, stronger by a decade in the corners of her mouth. She pushed her phone into my hands between pricing a row of snowman mugs and telling a teenager not to tangle the extension cords. "Isn't this your house?" she asked. On the screen was my address under a Redfin title that said, "Coming soon." There were pictures of my lilacs. No interior photos yet, but the description was breezy. Charming ranch on quiet cul-de-sac, perfect for young family, open concept potential. Listed by B. Ellis, Realtor R. I do not have a realtor's license, but I know enough to recognize my daughter-in-law's maiden name and a professional title she likes the way some people like monograms. The floor did a slow tilt. I excused myself to the storage room and sat on a Rubbermaid bin full of plastic holly garland. I pressed my palms to my knees until the world leveled. On the drive home, my phone pinged with a DocuSign email. Subject line, durable power of attorney. A paralegal I did not know had sent it. The signature spots were flagged in yellow like a friendly person had left a cheery trail for me to follow to my own erasure. At the kitchen table, I clicked open, then closed the laptop. I looked at the oak surface where 35 birthdays had been frosted and cut. I thought of Ed asking, in his gentle winter voice, "You good, Marge?" "No," I said out loud to the empty room, "but I will be." The next morning, I drove to the Waukesha County Courthouse. This country's legal buildings all smell like paper and determination. I parked between an F-150 with a bed full of lumber and a minivan that shed goldfish crumbs when the door opened. Upstairs, in the recorder's office, a clerk named Mrs. Alvarez, with cheerful nails, showed me how to file a request that no deed could be recorded on the house without my in-person ID. She slid a pamphlet toward me without any of the syrup that women sometimes pour over a hard truth. "If anyone tries paperwork without you," she said, tapping the form with her nail, "they'll meet me. I'm meaner than I look." "Thank you," I said. "I used to be a nurse. People don't always hear no when you say it kindly." At the credit union on Blue Mound, a teller with glitter polish put extra verification on my accounts, made them answer a question only I would know. It wasn't a big thing. It felt like new locks in my bones. She smiled at me the way people smile when they want you to know they think you are still made of something solid. "You'd be surprised," she said, lowering her voice. "People think being kin is the same thing as being entitled. We see it every week." "I suppose they think they're planning ahead," I said. "Planning is a nice word for some ugly things," she said, and slid my receipts across the counter like a benediction. The part of me that once got everyone's blankets straight and their water cups filled stood up and looked around inside. "You have this," it said. It did not sound like a cheerleader. It sounded like my mother when she told me to drive in winter. Slow, steady, don't slam the brakes, even if it feels safer. I called an agent I knew from church. Maria Tanaka is the kind of woman who doesn't call anyone hun. She wore sensible flats and a blazer that fit like she'd made peace with her shoulders. We met in my kitchen, and I told her 3 rules. No sign in the yard, no social media, we move fast. "In this market," she said, flipping through comps that made my practical eyes widen, "we can do as is and still have multiple offers. The trick is to accept the one that respects your timeline and your terms. My terms are dignity. I want to leave and feel like I chose it, not like I was run off my own porch." "Then let's give you exactly that," she said, and her smile did not try to sell me anything. 48 hours later, she brought a young couple to see the house. He was a paramedic with forearms that looked like he could lift a stranger off the floor without grunting about it. She taught 3rd graders and had the soft kind of voice people lean toward in noisy rooms. They walked through my home whispering the hopeful, private things people say when they are measuring the rest of their lives. In the small bedroom, with the view of the lilacs, she touched the wall like it was already holding a poster with the alphabet. They offered full price with a short close and a handwritten note. I accepted. Maria did her precise ballet of signatures and dates. I found a 1-bedroom at Willow Oaks, a 55-plus place, with a balcony that got morning sun like a movie about women who sew and find themselves in the second act. It was 6 minutes from the Brookfield Square coffee shop that Ruth loves, and exactly 3 minutes from the community center where the senior ceramics class meets on Thursdays. I packed what mattered. Ed's honor guard flag, the Packer cap he wore until the brim turned white, The recipe cards in my mother's crabbed handwriting where she wrote good after the recipes she liked and Ed likes after the ones she liked even more. The dining table. The china I never used except for holidays when I wished my patience was a platter I could set out and refill without losing my appetite. I donated what I could and left a card on the counter for the young couple. May this house hand you more good mornings than bad nights. While the boxes collected in the garage, life pretended to be normal. Kyle texted on Saturday, "Can we pop by Sunday?" Britt found a farmhouse sink on sale. I sent a thumbs up. Sometimes letting people walk toward a cliff is the only way they learn to stop driving with their eyes closed. Sunday, they arrived with iced lattes and conversation they'd clearly practiced using a mirror and a script. "We're worried about you," Brittany said, warming her voice to a setting called Caring Daughter-in-Law. "Those stairs to the basement are dangerous. What if you fell? God forbid." Kyle nodded. "We just want to help, Mom. There's a place in New Berlin, near the park. Perfect for when we have kids. But we need to move on it. The market." "The DocuSign," I said, lightly, letting the words drop into the room like something I'd pulled from my pocket because it was taking up space. "That was for my safety, too?" Kyle glanced at Brittany so fast the look left a streak in the air. "It's just a tool," he said, and because he cannot help himself, added, "Paperwork can be overwhelming." "For who?" I asked. He let out a little laugh. "For people who don't, deal with forms every day." I signed life and death medication orders at 3 a.m. for 30 years. I know my way around a signature. They blinked in the same rhythm, a married metronome. I changed the subject to potholes and whether anyone had fixed the light at Calhoun that never caught up with itself. I smiled when they left. Then I went to the laundry room and put my hand on Ed's old toolbox and cried until the crying felt like a deep cleaning. Closing day came like a sunrise you could not argue with. I signed and handed over keys. Mireille slid a folder toward me like a graduation. We hug the kind of hug women do when no one says I'm proud of you, but everyone means it. Willow oaks smelled like fresh paint and lemon oil. My balcony looked down on a courtyard where someone had coaxed a rose bush through Wisconsin winters by sheer stubbornness. The first morning I sat out there, the light found my face like a faithful friend who'd finally stopped knocking and let herself in. They came 2 days later, not to Willow Oaks, to the old house. I went back with Mireille to leave a spider plant on the counter and a note for the young couple. "Call if you need the name of the furnace guy who doesn't talk down to women." I heard Kyle before I saw him. The garage keypad still had the same 4 numbers it had for 20 years. He didn't know the young couple had changed it. Mom, the garage code's not working. Did you change it? What's going on?" I stepped out into the living room that echoed in a new way. Moving talks back to you. It says, "This is where you were, and this is what you choose." Brittany's mouth did a small practiced O, like in a surprised emoji. "Where is everything?" she said, her voice going high like an alarm. "This house belongs to someone new," I said. I wanted to see it empty before I let it go. Kyle's face did a quick slide from confusion to alarm to fury. "You sold it? Without telling us? We had plans." "I told you now. That's better than a listing I saw that told me nothing." Brittany flushed in splotches like she'd been outside on a windy day without a hat. "The Redsfin was a mistake," she said. "A friend hit publish. It was a draft." "And the power of attorney?" I asked. "Also an enthusiastic mistake?" Her eyes flickered, the way people's eyes do when truth knocks on the back door, and they decide whether to pretend not to hear it. "We were trying to plan ahead," she said. "You were trying to plan me," I said. My voice stayed calm. When you've told a drunken man he can't have more morphine, you learn the volume that carries. Kyle took a step toward me. "We're family," he said. A vein on his forehead made a decision and popped out. "Families don't nickel and dime each other. The right thing is to hand over the proceeds. We'll keep you close. We'll take care of you." I looked at my hands. They are not fancy hands. They have pulled strangers onto gurneys and held babies whose mothers were too tired to ask who I was. They have rubbed Ed's shoulders when he went thin in a way that made his sweatshirt hang wrong. They have kneaded dough and split pills and braided a boy's hair before third-grade pictures because he wanted to be like the quarterback. No, I said. 2 letters. A door shutting gently but firmly. Kyle's voice broke in the middle like a cheap pencil. That's my inheritance. That, I said, pointing at the blank rectangle where the television had been, was our living room. Your father and I paid for every inch of this with overtime and coupons and saying no to vacations. An inheritance is a maybe. A boundary is a now. Brittany's tears arrived exactly the way you'd expect grief to arrive at a rehearsal. We gave notice on our lease, she said. We told people we were moving. We bought a farmhouse sink. I hope you kept the receipt, I said. And somewhere in the back of my skull, Ed laughed at the neatness of it. Kyle lifted his chin like a man about to throw a punch he wasn't raised to throw. Give us the cash, Mom, he said quietly. You're being selfish. Mariah had told me to bring papers. Receipts matter when feelings threaten to rewrite what happened. I reached into my tote and set the Redfin screenshot on the bare kitchen counter. Next to it, the DocuSign email. Next to it, the recorder's office notice with my signature. A triangle of truth. Don't ever call me incompetent again. Don't send legal documents to a woman who has read tiny type at 2 a.m. while someone's wife sobs in a plastic chair. Silence is louder in empty rooms. It has room to echo back your own heartbeat to you. Kyle stared at the papers like they'd betrayed him personally. Brittany wiped one tear up and to the right, the way you do if you care about your foundation. We'll never forgive you, she said, then added using my full name, because names can be weapons, Marjorie. I hope you forgive yourselves, because this wasn't love. This was control dressed up as concern. They left. The door slammed like the house was making the decision for me. I walked through each room and touched the door frames with the flat of my hand. Thank you, I told them. Thank you for keeping me alive all those years I forgot to ask for more. At Willow Oaks that night, Ruth brought a casserole too heavy for its pan. It had cornflakes on top, because there are still parts of the Midwest that believe in texture. We sat at my tiny dinette with paper plates and talked the way women talk when the world expects them to apologize for taking up space, and they are out of sorries. Do you feel bad? She asked eventually. I feel untangled, I said, like I took out 100 knots and found my hair underneath. Ruth grinned. Tomorrow you're coming with me to the community center. There's a beginner pottery class. You need to put your hands in something that isn't a problem. The next afternoon, we stood at wheels that spun like small worlds. The instructor, Mrs. Klein, wore an apron with paint on it from 3 other lives. No perfect bowls today, she said, looking at me like my bones were visible and her job was to name them. Clay got under my nails and in my laugh lines. I pressed and pulled and made a lopsided thing that looked like it had a story. Mrs. Klein set it on a board with my name on a masking tape label and said, "Beautiful." I believed her because she meant it like a declaration, not a consolation prize. The aftershocks came as scheduled. Brittany's mother left me a voicemail with a voice like the sharper edge of a church potluck. Marjorie, this is Dolores. I'm not saying you have to, but good mothers think of their grandchildren first. I deleted it. A deacon texted me a verse about generosity with a winking emoji. I muted him. The next day he sent a picture of a sunrise with the caption, "Blessings." I muted his whole thread. Time moved in a way I didn't recognize at first. I woke and didn't count fears on the ceiling. I grocery shopped at Sendik's and learned the names of the cashiers. I kept quarters in my car console to put in the animal shelter jar at the register. I stood in the laundry room at Willow Oaks and listened to women describe the lives of their children as if reading weather reports. High pressure, then a clearing, then unexpected storms that knocked out power, but only for a night. 2 weeks later, a text arrived from a number I didn't know that turned out to be a number I'd known my whole life. It's Kyle. If you're willing, I'd like to talk. Not about money. I sat with the phone in my hand until the words blurred and the little dots appeared and disappeared like someone was thinking and then deciding not to think out loud. We met at Benny's Diner off Moreland. The waitress called me Hun and called him Sugar because she was an equal opportunity endearer. Kyle ordered black coffee and wrapped both hands around the mug like he'd grown cold somewhere I couldn't see. "I saw a counselor," he said. The sentence wore holes at the knees. "She asked when I first thought of your house as mine. I said, when Dad died." He tried to laugh. It came out like something breaking in half. "I'm sorry, Mom. I made you a means to an end. I was scared I'd never be enough." I thought of every time I'd put a hand on his forehead when he was little, checking for a fever that wasn't there, and every time fear pretended to be a temperature. I stirred cream into my coffee and said, "Fear doesn't excuse cruelty, but I know what fear does." "He doesn't expect anything," he said, and I believed him because he did not look up to check my face for weakness. "I just want to earn talking to you again." "Then talk," I said. "Tell me what you're reading. Tell me if you fixed the drip under your sink." He did. We spoke like the first day after a storm, when the air is clear, but you can still see branches down along the road. No requests, no scripts, just two people deciding to treat each other like humans and not ATMs or obstacles or a box on a to-do list you can satisfy with a 15-minute call on speaker. Spring came, and with it the art fair at the community center. Mrs. Klein hung our crooked bowls with pride. Mine wobbled on its pedestal like a man with a limp who refuses a chair because standing is the point. I wrote a little card beneath it, "Standing anyway." I didn't ask Kyle to come. He did. He carried a bouquet of grocery store tulips wrapped in paper like a poor man's secret. He stood in front of my bowl and looked at it a long time. "This is you," he said. "Bent, not broken." "Everyone's bowl leans somewhere," I said. He swallowed. "Mom, thank you for not letting me turn you into a down payment." A laugh escaped me like a bright thing startled into flight. "That's a sentence I never thought I'd hear," I said. We took a picture. Me with my bowl, my son with a jaw that looked softer at the edges the way winter finally looks when it realizes it's losing. I sent it to Ruth. She replied, "When's the next fish fry? I'm buying." I told her Friday. She sent back 3 fish emojis and a beer, which is the Wisconsin version of a formal RSVP. After the fair, as we drove, sun broke through the clouds and turned the puddles on Bluemont into coins. At a red light, I said what I didn't know I'd saved for this exact tone and weather. If you ever love someone who talks about you like a project, leave. Love is not a renovation. He nodded. He said, "You taught me that. Late, but better than never." Weeks folded themselves into a season. Brittany sent a short email to my Gmail account. It arrived on a Tuesday at 11:13 a.m. when I was at my balcony table with a cup of tea and a magazine with recipes I would fold and maybe try. The subject line was simply, "I don't know if you'll read this." I did. She wrote that she and Kyle had separated. Not because of me, she said, but because they had been building on a foundation of expectations and optics. That's the word she used, optics. She wrote that she was moving back to her mother's for a while to save money and think. She did not ask for money. She did not say sorry in a way that would make Hallmark proud, but she said it in a way that sounded like she finally understood that control wasn't care. I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because not replying was a way to keep us both honest. Sometimes silence is the boundary that keeps you from turning your own story into a cautionary tale. On a Saturday, Ruth and I took the bus to the Milwaukee Art Museum because she said any place with a wing that looks like a bird knows about leaving. We stood in front of a painting that made me want to lie down on the floor and look at it until the guard asked me to stop discovering myself in public. We ate tuna melts at a diner that served pie like it hated to see any woman go without sugar. We laughed until the waitress said we were trouble, with a gleam in her eye that meant we were doing it right. June came. The community center posted a sign-up sheet for a day trip to Door County to look at lighthouses and stand in the wind and pretend we were the kind of women who'd been wild when we were 20 and were now wild in a way that made our bones hum. I put my name down. I didn't ask anyone's permission. I didn't leave a note for anyone to find under a magnet on a fridge. I put the date in my calendar and circled it twice. The day before we left Willow Oaks, a thunderstorm rolled over Brookfield with rain like applause. I sat on my balcony with a blanket and watched the sky do what it does when it wants to remind you you're small, and that being small is a relief sometimes. My phone buzzed with a text from Kyle. Safe? I sent him a picture of my toes, which were in socks and on a footstool, the universal symbol of I am not driving in this. At 2 a.m, I woke not from the old fear, but from a dream where Ed was sitting on our porch in a lawn chair that made him look like a man on a throne in a kingdom where every subject is a bird. He said, "Good fight, Marge." Then he faded the way men do when your brain wants to be kind and isn't sure how to do it while you're asleep. Door County was everything Ruth promised. Wind that took your hair and made it honest. Water that looked like it had been practicing being blue for this moment. A cherry pie that tasted like every summer you thought you missed and now had back in a forkful. On the bus home, we shared earbuds and listened to a podcast about 2 women our age starting a woodworking shop in a town that thought women our age should take up knitting and be grateful. We nodded like, yes, yes, the world can keep its narrow. In July, the young couple who bought my house sent a postcard. There was a picture of a toddler's hand smushed against the window I used to watch for snow through. They wrote that they painted the kitchen a color called lemon cream and that the lilac smelled like home now. I put the card on my fridge with a magnet shaped like a cow that Ruth insists is kitschy and therefore holy. I cried a little and called it hydration. The next Sunday, Kyle came by Willow Oaks. He texted first. He always texted first now. He brought bagels from the place on Capitol that doesn't skimp on sesame. He asked if he could fix the sticky kitchen drawer. He fixed it with a little bar of soap and something that looked like patience. I stood by the sink and watched his hands work and realized my shoulders weren't up around my ears like I was wearing them as earmuffs. "Mom," he said, sliding the drawer in and out to show me it was smooth. "Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" I dried a plate and set it in the rack. Forgiveness is not a coupon. It's not a thing you hand over to get a discount on what you did. He smiled like he didn't know whether to laugh or take notes. "So that's a maybe?" I said it's a yes about my own heart. I forgive me for not having a better plan sooner. I forgive me for believing that we're family meant I get to vote about your life. I forgive me for not teaching you boundaries earlier. As for you, I think we're both in a process. You keep showing up like a man who understands that love is not a renovation. I'll keep the kettle on. He nodded. Fair deal. August brought a heat that sat on the city like a fat cat. The community center hosted a talent show where no one was talented in the way TV thinks talent is, but everyone was the kind of good that matters in real rooms. I read a piece I'd written in my notebook on the balcony about smaller spaces and bigger sun and bowls that lean. The microphone squealed and my voice shook, and then it stopped shaking. People clapped. Ruth whistled with 2 fingers in a way that made everyone look at her and grow a smile. After the show, a woman named Denise with a walker and a lipstick color called Outspoken came up and touched my wrist. "My daughter says I'm a burden," she said, half whisper, half dare. I told her I'm a person. Sometimes it's hard to remember that when you're the one who needs rides. "You're still a person if you never drive again," I said. "You're a person if you spill tea on your lap and say a word your mother would wash your mouth out for. You're a person if you say no." She nodded. We stood there 2 minutes past comfortable, because sometimes women our age need someone to stand with them, even if it makes the line for watermelon slices longer. September arrived like a neat stack of school supplies. Kyle called once a week. He told me he'd gone back to softball on Thursdays and thighs don't forgive like they used to. He told me he'd started reading at night instead of falling asleep to the blue light of YouTube tutorials about why you should never clean your keyboard with canned air. He told me he had had dinner with his dad's old friend Al and finally looked at a photo album that used to make his chest feel like it was filling with sand. He did not ask for money. He did not bring up wills. He asked me what glaze I was going to put on my next bowl, like glaze was a word men used to say how they were proud. One afternoon at Syndic's, I ran into the deacon who had sent me the verse and the winking emoji. He put his hand on the freezer door like he was blessing the frozen peas and said, "Heard you had a situation. The Lord loves a cheerful giver." "The Lord also loves a wise steward," I said, picking up my peas and closing the door. "And my generosity is not a public utility." He laughed, then realized I wasn't joking. "God bless," he said softer. "Truly." I nodded. He has, with good bowls and better boundaries. On a Sunday that smelled like football, even to people who don't watch, I met Kyle at the cemetery. We stood by Ed's stone and said small things because big things felt rude in a place where people tried to keep their grief folded. Kyle cleared his throat. "I think the day Dad died, I decided I would control everything I could because I couldn't control that. I looked at your house and saw something I could hold. Then I forgot you were holding it already." "I know," I said. I put my hand on the top of the stone like it was the back of a head bowed for a kiss. Sometimes holding and stealing look the same. That's why we tell the truth out loud. We didn't stay long. We never do. Grief is a house guest who knows when to leave if you teach it. On the way back to our cars, Kyle stopped. He said he found a new place. Rental. Small. Lots of light. No farmhouse sink. Good. Light matters more than sinks. October brought the kind of days that make Wisconsin flirt with you. The leaves at Willow Oaks turned a color that my mother would have called pumpkin, and I called, "You're not fooling anyone. Winter is coming." I pulled a sweater over my shoulders and watched an older couple in matching windbreakers shuffle along the courtyard faster than some people run. Mrs. Klein announced the fall ceramics show with posters printed on paper the color of late afternoon. We glazed our bowls. We sanded the bottoms until they didn't scratch the tables the way old hurts scratch conversations if you don't smooth them on purpose. The night of the show, The community center smelled like coffee and sugar cookies that came out of a box but felt homemade because someone had arranged them with sprinkles facing kindly. People drifted between the tables saying, "I love that," and "How did you make it do that?" And "You couldn't do anything wrong if you tried." The kind of sentences you want to bottle and keep in your pocket for when the bus is late and your left shoe squeaks. My bowl sat on its little stand, wobbly and sure, standing anyway. The card with my name on it looked more like mine than my driver's license ever had. Kyle stood beside me and didn't try to fix it. He did not say a single sentence that started with, "But if we just..." He kept his hands in his pockets and his mouth quiet and his eyes kind. "I'm proud of you. It takes a lot to say no to a house. It takes more to say yes to yourself and to keep saying it when people tisk." We sat on the curb afterward and ate brownies out of napkins because no one can be fancy sitting on a curb. Ruth took a picture of us and captioned it, "2 bowls, 1 family, a whole lot of standing." That night on my balcony, I wrote in my notebook. I wrote messily because neatness is not a virtue in truth-telling. I wrote about smaller spaces and bigger light. I wrote about how joy looks different when you've been starving, and you should never apologize for taking seconds if you haven't had a plate in years. I wrote about my house in Brookfield and my 1-bedroom at Willow Oaks and how both saved me. I wrote about Brittany's email and how I didn't reply, and how sometimes not replying is the only way to not lie. I wrote about Kyle's voice, layered with humility like butter. I wrote about Ed in the lawn chair in my dream and his good fight, and the way a man can love you by showing up in your brain when you need courage and a laugh at the same time. I wrote this, and when I read it back to myself, it felt like a pledge a woman can make to herself without witnesses, which is the best kind. I am 64. I am nobody's plan. I am allowed to choose a small place with big sun and a bowl that stands even when it leans. I am allowed to keep my hands in my own pockets, unless I'm taking them out to clap for myself. I am allowed to forgive myself before I even think about forgiving anyone else. I am allowed to be new. In November, the young couple who bought my house invited me for cocoa. They didn't have to. They wanted to. I stood in my old kitchen painted a color called lemon cream and didn't feel sad. I felt like a woman who left a place better than she found it and who knows she was not meant to be a forever there. The paramedic showed me a dent in the baseboard where he'd misjudged the angle on the crib and said, "We'll fix it." The teacher laughed and said, "We like it. It reminds us we live here." On the way home, I drove by the house one more time, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to tell the lilacs I was fine. That's the thing no one tells you about leaving. You can still love a place without living there. You can still wave at the rooms like they are cousins. December is a grief month, if you let it. It is also a month of lights on porches that have seen arguments and reconciliations, and children cry over things they will not remember. I put a string of white lights on my balcony railing, and it felt like an invitation to myself. I bought a tiny fake tree and set it on my table, and hung 3 ornaments, one with the picture of Ed from 1987, where his mustache looks like a dare, one of a clay bowl Ruth made me, one of a felt cat someone had made with buttons that didn't match, and a tail that could not decide if it was ambitious or shy. On Christmas Eve day, Kyle came by with a ham under one arm like a cartoon dad. He fumbled with the ribbon on the box that held a small frame. He said, "I don't know if you want this," and held it out with both hands, the way you hand a fragile thing you don't want to rehearse dropping. It was a photo from the art fair, me with my wobbly bowl, light coming in at a flattering angle by accident, the words "standing anyway" clear enough to read if you leaned in. Kyle's hand on my shoulder, the kind of picture you keep where you will see it by mistake on hard mornings. "I want it," I said, and put it on the bookshelf where Ed's Packer cap sits like a crown. We ate ham and potatoes and green beans with bacon because some traditions refuse to die. We talked about nothing in a way that made everything feel real. We laughed, not because we were pretending, but because it turns out grief and joy share a throat and take turns. When he left, he hugged me in a way that made me think of the day he first learned to put his arms around my waist instead of my knees. New Year's Day rose gray over the courtyard. I made coffee and did not make resolutions because improvements are not moral obligations. I stood on the balcony in my robe and socks and said out loud, "I did the hard thing." The air was sharp. My breath looked like a small cloud. Somewhere, a snowblower complained in a way that made me love its owner for trying. In the spring, the community center started a memoir class for seniors with a retired journalist who wrote on the board, "Write like you're telling your favorite niece the truth." We wrote about first kisses and last days at jobs that paid the rent and stole our backs. We wrote about pies and pills and the way the light hits a Midwestern kitchen in late afternoon, like a promise you forgot you made to yourself. We read each other's words and did not correct grammar unless grammar had lied. One afternoon, the journalist asked us to write a sentence that would be the moral of the last year. People wrote, "Family first," and "It's never too late," and "I am still here." When it was my turn, I wrote, "Your love is not collateral." Then I added, "Inheritance is a maybe. A boundary is a now." The journalist nodded. "Put that on your fridge," she said. "Put that in your will." I laughed, but when I got home, I wrote it on a recipe card and stuck it next to the postcard with the toddler hand and the cow magnet. Every day, while I boiled water for tea and wiped the counter and watered the basil, I always overwater, I read it without trying to memorize it. It memorized me. Summer again. Ruth and I took turns buying fish fry because that is how Midwestern women keep track of love without drowning in it. Kyle started dating someone who had opinions about baseball and didn't say them like she was the ump. He asked if I wanted to meet her. I said yes. She shook my hand and said she liked my bowl and that she'd never thought of bowls as a way to tell the truth about a year until now. She didn't mention houses. I did not mention Redfin. We ate and laughed and made the kind of eye contact you make with your son across a table when you both recognize that the air is lighter and no one had to become a different person to get there, just a truer one. On the anniversary of the day, I stood in my empty living room and said no, like a woman uses good scissors and doesn't apologize. I went back to the cul-de-sac. I parked and sat for a minute. I did not get out. I didn't need a ceremony. I needed a quiet inside me that matched the quiet of the street. A man in a robe walked a beagle who looked like he'd been up too late. A girl rode a bike with streamers that made a sound like mischief. The lilacs leaned toward the street like neighbors. I drove away and rolled my windows down and let the smell in until it had to leave by itself. That night, I stood on my balcony and looked at the courtyard where the rosebush had made it through another winter out of pure spite and grace. I thought about the word winner and how it is mostly a commercial. I thought about the word keeper and how it is what you should call a woman who keeps her own soul. I thought about the word home and how it is not an address and never was. I set my bowl on the table, standing anyway. It wobbled and did not fall. I put my palm over its roundness like you bless a thing or claim it or both. I spoke one last sentence into the mild dark. Not as a confession, not as an apology, but as the truest thing I know about the way we go on. I belong to no one's plan now. I belong to me, and that is not selfish. That is grown. In the morning, I made coffee in the machine that still sometimes laughs into its sleeve. I buttered toast and ate it over the sink, because I can. I watered the basil too much and forgave myself for it and put the pot on the balcony where thinking and sun can fix what I ruin. Kyle texted a picture of a toolbox and the word progress. I sent back a bowl emoji and the word same. The day warmed, the light did what it always does, and then what it only does for women who have done the hard thing. It stayed. It moved across the floor like a quiet parade. It put itself in my lap like a cat that asks for nothing and gives you the world. And I sat there in my small place with big sun, leaning and standing, broken and whole. And if you drove by and saw me, you would think nothing had happened here. You would be wrong in a way that would not hurt you. You might wave. I would wave back. The story would go on, because that is what stories do when you stop begging them to be something else.